The first time I realized how much I was worth to them was the moment they told me indirectly that I was worth exactly nothing. I had just worked a 10-hour shift at Marceline Regional Hospital, where I managed billing compliance for 3 outpatient apartments. I came home my parents' home, the 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville that my grandmother Eudora had helped them purchase, and found my family eating pot roast at the dining room table. My mother hadn't set a place for me. She hadn't set one for my 5-year-old son Theo either. My younger sister Paige looked up from her phone just long enough to move her tote bag off the chair beside her and say, "Oh, you can probably grab one from the kitchen." Her bag had been sitting where my child would have sat. That was February. By March I had left, and by April the phone call started. "My name is Renata. I'm 29. I have a son named Theo who collects rocks and once cried for 11 minutes because a roly-poly bug died on the sidewalk. I am a billing compliance analyst, which means I understand at a granular level exactly what things cost and exactly who is being charged unfairly." The irony was not lost on me. For 2 years, I had been paying my parents $1,100 a month to live in the bedroom. My older brother Marcus, 33, lived there for free. Paige, 24, lived there for free. I asked my mother once why I was the only one paying. She adjusted her reading glasses and said, "Renata, you have a child. You're using more of the household." Theo, my 5-year-old who ate toast and asked questions about clouds, that was the drain. My father Raymond was the kind of man who had opinions he kept entirely to himself. He worked, came home, watched television in the den, and treated my mother's management of the household as whether something that happened around him that he had no power over. My mother Gloria ran things the way a landlord runs a property they've decided to let deteriorate selectively. Every accommodation she extended was framed as generosity so enormous it required ongoing acknowledgement. She also, around month 3 of the rent arrangement, began suggesting I contribute more. Around the house said if I helped consistently, she might revisit the amount. Might she used that word with the precision of someone who knew exactly what it was doing. So I did it. I cleaned the kitchen after dinner every night. I did everyone's laundry, Marcus's gym clothes, Paige's salon uniforms, my father's work shirts. I scrubbed bathrooms on weekends. I worked a full-time job managing compliance documentation for a hospital network and came home and managed someone else's household for the theoretical possibility of a rent reduction that never materialized. Theo would sometimes hand me his dinosaur band-aids for my dry, cracked knuckles like he was a field medic. He was the only reason any of it felt survivable. The dinner with the chair broke something in me, but the explosion came the following Sunday. My mother did formal Sunday dinners the way other families do religious observance. Everyone at the table at 5:30, no exceptions. I came down with Theo in his good sweater. My mother had made roasted chicken. She looked at me across the table and said in front of everyone, "Renata, the upstairs bathroom wasn't done this week. If you want me to think about adjusting your arrangement, you need to stay on top of your responsibilities." In the house I had lived in since I was 4 years old, I put my fork down. I said, "Mom, I pay you $1,100 a month. Marcus pays nothing. Paige pays nothing. I clean this house after 10-hour shifts. I pay for Theo's daycare, his food, his doctor visits, everything separately. And this past Tuesday, you didn't set a place for my son at your table." Paige's tote bag had a chair. Theo didn't. The room went still in the specific way rooms go still when something that has been building for a very long time finally arrives. My mother said, "I cannot believe you would do this at my table." Her table, not the family table. I said, "The table I cleaned yesterday." She looked at me with an expression she had perfected over decades and said, "If you're unhappy here, maybe this arrangement isn't working for you." She said it the way you say something you know will land, like a threat. She knew I was stretched thin. She had watched me become stretched thin, and she was using it. I looked at Theo, who was quietly peeling apart his chicken with his fingers, completely unbothered, trusting entirely that the adults around him had things under control. I stood up and said, "You're right, it isn't." I packed in 40 minutes 2 suitcases, 3 garbage bags, Theo's backpack with his rocks, and his stuffed bear. Nobody came upstairs. I heard the television come back on. I buckled Theo into the car at 7:15 on a Sunday night, and I did not look in the rearview mirror. We spent the first night in a motel off the highway, $47. The room was small, and the carpet was questionable, and Theo thought it was the greatest adventure of his life because the ice machine was down the hall. He fell asleep by 8. I sat on the edge of the bed and cried in a way I hadn't cried in years, not because I missed that house, but because a $47 motel room felt more like home than the one I had just left. I found an apartment the next morning, a 1-bedroom on the east side, $870 a month. The property manager, a quiet man named Dale, looked at my pay stub, looked at Theo arranging his rocks on the corner of the desk, and said he could work with me on the Deposit timing. A stranger did that. In 5 minutes we moved in with an air mattress and a folding table. We ate on it for 2 weeks. Theo called it camping. I called it authentic. I couldn't quite make work. No one called. Not Marcus, not Paige, not my father, not my mother. 29 years. And I had been removed from the family group chat within a week. Paige did it. I know because I checked. Have you ever noticed how silence from people who are supposed to love you isn't actually quiet? It's extremely loud. The call that changed everything came on a Saturday in late March. Theo answered my phone because he always answered my phone. I heard him say with great seriousness, "Hello, this is Theo." And then I heard my grandmother Eudora say, "Theo, sweetheart, where is your mother?" I took the phone into the kitchen and she said, "Renata Louise, I called your mother's house. And Marcus told me you'd moved out weeks ago. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't you tell me I had not called her?" Because somewhere in the architecture my mother had built inside me, I had been so thoroughly trained to manage quietly that calling Eudora had not even occurred to me as an option. I told her the short version: the rent, the cleaning, the dinner. Without a chair for Theo, the Sunday table. There was a silence on the line. Then Eudora said in a voice I had heard maybe twice in my life, low and absolutely level, "She was charging you $1,100 a month and Marcus and Paige paid nothing." Another pause. Then, "I'm getting in my car." Eudora is 75. She drives a 2011 Buick. That sounds like it has strong opinions about hills. She drove 90 minutes from Lancaster in a March rainstorm without asking permission from anyone, including the weather. She arrived at noon with 2 grocery bags and a blanket from her own bed. She walked into the apartment, took in the air mattress, the folding table, the bare walls, and stood very still for a moment. Then she looked at me and her eyes filled, and she said, "How long have you been living like this, baby?" I couldn't answer. I just held on to her and let myself fall apart in the way you can only do with someone who will not use it against you later. Theo wrapped himself around her legs and told her we had been camping, and she said quietly, "Not anymore." She unpacked groceries, made lunch on the stove top, and listened to me talk for 2 hours. She didn't interrupt. By the time I finished, her face had taken on the particular stillness that meant she had arrived at a decision. She said, "I want you to know that I helped your parents buy that house, $40,000, 22 years ago. I did it because I wanted my grandchildren to have stability." She picked up her phone and called my mother, put it on speaker. Without asking me, my mother answered on the 3rd ring. "Eudora," said Gloria, "I'm sitting in Renata's apartment. There is no furniture. My great-grandson has been sleeping on an air mattress. I would like you to explain to me how this happened." The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had heard in 2 years. My mother tried several things that I had chosen to leave, that Eudora was only hearing one side, that she had been trying to teach responsibility. Eudora let each one land, and then said, "I gave you $40,000 for that house, so all of my grandchildren would have a home. You turned it into a mechanism to extract money from the one who could least afford it. Your father would not recognize you right now, Gloria." She hung up without waiting for a response. Then she looked at me and said, "Now, let's fix this." What followed was 2 weeks of Eudora operating at a level of focused intention I had never witnessed. She came back the following weekend with an envelope she would not itemize, which she placed on the table and said, 3 months of breathing room and furniture. Do not argue with me." I argued. She ignored me completely. By the end of the week, Theo had a real bed. We had a kitchen table with 4 chairs and a second-hand sofa that smelled faintly like cedar and someone else's good memories. She also went to my parents' house that Saturday. I wasn't there. Marcus called me afterward, which was the first time he had called since I left. He sounded genuinely rattled. He said Eudora sat everyone down at the kitchen table and told them she was reconsidering the financial arrangements she had planned to leave them, that Marcus and Paige would begin paying rent or find somewhere else to live, that my mother would apologize to me, a real apology, not her preferred formulation of "I'm sorry you feel that way." Marcus said, "Renata, it was intense." I said, "Good, that's the correct response to what happened." My mother came to my apartment 3 days later unannounced, which was brave of her in the specific way it takes bravery to show up somewhere you're not sure you'll be allowed in. She was holding a container of roasted chicken. I almost didn't let her in, but Theo heard her voice and came running, and you cannot close a door on that. She sat at the table Eudora had bought because my mother's choices had made it impossible for me to buy my own, and she said things I had never heard her say, that she had told herself I was fine because it was easier, that she had kept taking because I had never stopped giving, that she had been awake 3 nights thinking about the Tuesday dinner, and where Theo had not had a seat, I let the silence sit longer than was comfortable. Then I said, "Your grandson ate standing at your kitchen counter because there was no chair for him. I ate 1 meal a day for a week, so He could eat 3. That is not a misunderstanding, that is cruelty. She put her hands over her face. Theo whispered to me, "Is Grandma sad?" I told him, groan UPS. Sometimes need to cry too. When she pulled herself together, she asked me what she could do. I told her I was not coming back to that house, that this was our home, that if she wanted to be in our lives, the terms had changed permanently. She nodded. She looked like someone who had just understood the full cost of something she had been purchasing on credit for years. Things are not restored. I'm not sure they will be completely, but they are different. My father came by on a Thursday with a carbon monoxide detector, because that is how Raymond communicates that he loves you, through safety hardware and practical repair. He fixed a cabinet hinge. He checked the window locks before he left. He told me he should have said something earlier, that a man who stays quiet while someone with more power takes from someone with less isn't staying out of it. He hugged me on his way out, stiff and brief, and genuinely meant Marcus pays rent now. Paige eventually apologized, first performatively, then 3 days later again, shorter and truer. Casey's version of sorry is often just the beginning of actually meaning it. "We did Thanksgiving at Eudora's." She set one condition: everyone comes, everyone behaves like family, or she would have questions. Everyone came. Theo announced he was grateful for rocks and also macaroni, and the laughter that followed dissolved something that had been sitting heavy over the table. I have a real life now, a small one, still rebuilding, but real. Theo has his own place at every table we sit at, his own plate, his own chair. I will not negotiate on that point with anyone. Here's what I know about making yourself smaller to survive inside someone else's generosity: the price compounds. You pay it daily, in ways that don't show up on any statement, until the moment you finally look, and the moment you stop paying it, the moment you stand up from the table they forgot to set for you. That is not abandonment. That is the most honest accounting you will ever do. So let me ask you something. How long have you been covering a bill no one else in the room has been asked to pay?